This man had just entered prison and was targeted by other prisoners who were preparing to make him experience pain. At that moment, the inmates came to help him. He jumped down from the bed, hit the opponent's head, then pressed his head on the bed and hit him until the opponent collapsed right where he was before he stopped. The prisoner's juniors were also frightened into giving him his glasses. After that, he put on his glasses and took his stuff to go out to the yard to rest. But the prison gang wouldn't stop, and soon a large group of people stood blocking the bathroom door. He calmly took off his glasses, then he single-handedly took on a group of thugs, hitting wherever he went. The opponents were quickly defeated by him. He even blinded one guy. At this time, the warden received the news and quickly arrived. In less than 20 seconds, he had finished the fight. When he arrived, the prison guards could only clean up the mess and then put him in solitary confinement. This man named Reacher was a retired soldier, unfortunately arrested for murder. A few hours ago, he arrived in a town and was about to enjoy lunch when suddenly a police siren sounded. The police officer discovered that there were only old people and children in the restaurant. He immediately realized that he was the suspect and quietly put his money and both hands on the table. His torn and dirty hands endured the glare. But one statement from the police made him very confused. The opponent arrested him for attempted murder. For no reason, the charge of attempted murder was placed on his head. Reacher was not worried at all and cooperated with the police. At the station, he was questioned by Police Chief Oscar. Only then did Reacher realize what had happened. There was a murder case in town. The body was discovered near the highway. 2 gunshots hit the head. The body was hidden by cardboard cutouts. The victim died and was beaten. There were no bullet casings at the scene. Because someone saw Reacher walking on the highway this morning, he was considered the first suspect. And now he also had some judgment about this case, so he spoke up to defend himself. With quick thinking ability, through only a few clues from Oscar, he determined that there were 3 perpetrators. It wasn't the first time the person who dumped the gun had committed a crime, so he picked up the casings. The person who beat the victim was a person with a perverted mentality. The extremely careful shooter would not arbitrarily cover the victim. As for the perverted psychopath, he wouldn't be able to hide the body. So there must have been a 3rd person at the scene. Reacher was just passing through. But Oscar didn't believe it. To prove his innocence, Reacher proactively requested to extract the security camera footage from the bus, because the time of the victim's death was 8 p.m. and he was still on the bus at that time. But extracting the camera footage took time. So Reacher was locked in a cell, while Oscar continued to investigate. According to a phone found at the scene, Oscar found the owner of the phone number, Paul, a bank employee. At first, Paul did not pay attention to what the police said. But when he saw the black car outside, he suddenly became tense, even actively admitting that he was the murderer. Paul was taken to the police station. Reacher saw that someone had confessed and immediately prepared to leave, but was stopped by Oscar. It turned out that he saw that Reacher had extremely high judgment ability and wanted to keep him to help with the work. Relying on his ability, Reacher told Oscar's secret. He was wearing a suit but looked extremely rumpled. There was probably no woman around to take care of him. The thin ring on his hand showed that Oscar often touched it every time he remembered his wife, so Oscar had just gotten divorced not long ago. As expected, this speculation surprised him quite a bit. Reacher continued to say that there must be some relation between the police officer and Paul, because just now they looked at each other for 2 seconds. To prove this guess, Oscar immediately called the police officer to ask. It was true that the officer and Paul were cousins. On the night of the murder, the 2 people had gathered to eat and drink, so Paul could not have had time to commit the crime. But why did he confess? Oscar couldn't understand. So he decided to put Paul in prison for a week of observation. He might reveal the truth hidden behind. Reacher was also imprisoned. Going to prison meant having to undergo a full body examination. Reacher refused and immediately threatened the prison guard. Faced with Reacher, the warden let him skip the inspection. The next day, Reacher discovered that they were locked in a prison block full of serious criminals. Very quickly, the thugs found them. Paul was robbed of his glasses, and then the criminals tried to let him taste rape. Luckily, Reacher was in charge. In less than 2 seconds, the opponent was defeated. Reacher put on Paul's glasses and boldly left. Paul also trusted Reacher more and told him why he confessed. It turned out that someone was threatening him. They said if he did not confess, the outcome would be very tragic and his family would not be at peace. So, to be safe, Paul had to admit his guilt. Soon, the second group of thugs found them. The prison gang saw Reacher wearing glasses and immediately went to the bathroom to block his way. Reacher began to show off his skills, single-handedly taking on the big criminals. Meanwhile, the police gave Reacher's information sheet to Oscar. Documents showed that Reacher graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, was a major, had solved 150 cases, and captured more than 20 fleeing criminals. It was very clear that this was a person who was not easy to deal with. After reading the documents, Oscar felt a bit regretful and immediately bailed Reacher out. Police officer Roscoe came to pick him up. She also said that the passenger bus's camera had proven his innocence and wanted to invite him to dinner. Reacher happily agreed, then he went to the barber shop for a shave. At this time, a forest green pickup truck was outside. 2 sassy young men kept an eye on Reacher. One of them threatened him, then left. Reacher did not understand what was going on and returned to the police station, but the town had another murder. The body was discovered at the previous murder scene. After that, Roscoe went to the coroner's office to investigate the incident. Reacher stood aside and waited for her to get off work. At this time, he saw the victim's image on the computer. Through the scent, he discovered that the victim was his biological brother. Then he went into the coroner's office to confirm. His brother's death forced Reacher to stay in town. He must find the person who murdered his brother, then kill them all. At night, Reacher tiredly returned to the motel to rest. At this moment, a group of thugs appeared. Reacher was angry, and it felt good to take his anger out on them. 3 men had their arms broken. The remaining one ran away with his accomplices. That night, Reacher couldn't sleep. Why did his brother, who worked at the Treasury Department, appear in this town? The case became more and more serious, and Paul was the only clue right now. To quickly investigate the truth, Reacher went with Roscoe to Paul's house, but he was not home right now. After being released from prison on bail, he had gone missing. The wife obviously knew nothing about this. Reacher pretended to go to the bathroom, then went into Paul's room to search. He discovered weeds on the subject's shoes. An office worker had weeds on his shoes? Reacher suddenly remembered when he was in prison, he was not the gang's target because he felt they were targeting Paul. It was clear that Paul was the person they needed. Next, the two went to the crime scene and found weeds on shoes similar to the weeds here. Then, Reacher speculated, recreating the case, but couldn't find any clues, so he had to return to the motel. The next morning, Reacher went to the police station. Roscoe announced that another crime had occurred in the town, and the person killed was the police station chief. Coming to the crime scene, he immediately made his guess before he had even gone in. Through footprints, he had determined that there were 4 murderers and that the victim had been nailed to the wall. And his guess was completely correct, according to the victim's wife in the bloody incident. Reacher made such speculation because Paul once said that if he did not listen, it would end up like that. There was no doubt that Paul was in danger. The chief was killed. Reacher suspected that there was an insider in the police station. Oscar immediately sought help from a colleague in another state, asking him to protect Paul's wife. At this time, newly inaugurated Chief Grover was reassuring the people. But the person who was immediately elected, Grover, was also very suspicious. He didn't even like Oscar. Then, to find out who was behind it, Reacher speculated that Warden Spivey was definitely involved, because he intentionally changed the cell, creating an opportunity for criminals to attack Paul. Reacher used Oscar's identity to ask Spivey out. Unexpectedly, he already knew everything and was just waiting for Reacher to fall into the trap. 2 guys with pistols appeared, catching Reacher and aiming at the back of his head. While he remained calm, he pretended to say that the car's seat was too small to distract them. Reacher attacked at the right time so that they wouldn't have time to respond, but they had also been trained. During the fight, Reacher was injured, but fortunately he was able to defeat his opponent right after that. At this time, the police appeared. Reacher did not know if they were an enemy or a friend, so he ran away. Roscoe then helped him treat his wound. Through the opponent's moves and attacks, Reacher guessed that they must be mercenaries from South America. Otherwise, with Reacher's ability, he could have defeated them in less than 10 seconds. At this time, Roscoe found the file for the special department of the Treasury, where his brother worked, whose job was mainly to investigate fraud cases. But they would have to wait until tomorrow to find out what specific field he worked in. Reacher remembered Paul was a money manager. Did it have anything to do with counterfeit money? The investigation again fell into a deadlock. Reacher went to find a shop to drink alcohol to relieve his sadness. Oscar was afraid that Reacher would cause trouble again, so he sent Roscoe along. After having a few glasses of wine, Roscoe took Reacher home. In the middle of the road, a police car stopped them. The road ahead was temporarily damaged and impassable. The two had to find a temporary motel. The next day, they drove to Roscoe's house and discovered the door was broken. On the door was written the words, "See you soon." Seeing such a situation, Reacher asked for a gun. Roscoe thought for a while and finally gave him one. At this time, Oscar texted he had found information about the identity of the first victim. Then, the 3 people met at the house next door. According to the forensics report, the victim was a truck driver named
Peter Zapata. The victim's blood contained a large amount of hydroxyzine, probably from truck exhaust fumes. The victim had no criminal record but was arrested for a traffic violation. He was later released because the victim's defense lawyer was the most famous lawyer in the locality. How could a truck driver have so much money to hire such a famous lawyer? Reacher thought that there must be a problem in this matter, so the 3 of them began to investigate. At this moment, Roscoe's phone rang. She was called by the Special Department of the Treasury. They finally received news from the Treasury Department. The caller was Joe's superior named Molly, who was also Joe's lover. After hearing the news that Joe was murdered, Molly was extremely hurt. When she calmed down, Molly told them that Joe was the captain of the Special Division, mainly investigating counterfeiting cases. To know specific information about the case Joe was working on, Molly needed a day to find relevant information. At this time, Reacher reminded Molly to keep it a secret, because Joe was investigating in secret. It was very likely that there was a problem with the Special Department. After the call, the 3 people split up and took action. Oscar went to lawyer Spivey's place and politely knocked on the door. Seeing that no one responded, he directly kicked the door in. The neighbors next door saw this scene. Reacher went inside and discovered a phone in the bedroom. The call log only had 1 number. At this moment, someone suddenly attacked. The two policemen thought he was a thief, so without saying a word, they started kicking him. As for Reacher, his method at the lawyer's office was very direct. There was nothing that force couldn't solve. He took the phone cord and strangled the boss to get Peter Zapata's case file. As for Roscoe, to keep Chief Grover from getting suspicious, she stayed at the police station. But colleague Stevenson was a bit unusual. He went to talk to Roscoe. In his words, there was an intention to probe for information. After Roscoe found out, she only gave him a vague answer. The three people gathered at the diner. From Peter Zapata's files, Reacher learned that his transportation company had a cooperative relationship with the Kleiner factory. The lawyer's fee was also paid by the Kleiner enterprise. The phone number in Spivey's phone was also the phone number for the Kleiner factory. All clues pointed to the Kleiner factory. Then Reacher and Oscar went to that factory. As soon as he entered the factory, Reacher immediately discovered something unusual. There were no security cameras around here, and the amount of animal feed was countless. Going to the boss's office, the animal specimens hanging on the wall caught Reacher's attention. After meeting with Boss Kleiner, it was not surprising that they could not get any useful information. The two returned empty-handed. At the motel, Reacher decided to go out and look for clues. At a nearby bar, Reacher found a boxer that he knew. The boxer said that he once won a yellow belt. But in front of Reacher, he was just being polite. After just 2 or 3 punches, he beat the opponent to a pulp. But he had no idea where the guy had gone. Reacher could only find other clues. When he was about to drive, he realized someone was following him. What do you do if you graduate from the military academy and are followed by others? First, get out of the car and go into a bar. He took a pair of gloves, then got in the car and drove at 88 kilometers per hour, rushing down a small road. He pulled out the gun, opened the door, and jumped out onto the side of the road. The SUV without a driver automatically stopped, and Reacher hid in the nearby grass. Soon, the car following him arrived. 2 South American mercenaries got out and approached the SUV, not knowing the danger that was right behind them. Reacher appeared and shot 2 of them, sending them to the underworld. Then he picked up the bullet casings on the ground, put on his gloves, and searched them for clues. Next, he erased his traces and dragged the body to their car. But when he opened the trunk, Reacher discovered the person he had been looking for several days was inside. At this point, Reacher could only continue processing the scene. He broke the phone, then searched the car's body, not missing any details. At this time, he discovered a lighter and hair gel in the SUV bag. The unused hair gel was thrown away. The lighter worked, so he took it. After finishing everything, he stuffed the body into the trunk. But the trunk was too small. What should he do? It was okay. It was fine to break bones. While Reacher was killing people, Oscar also had no time to spare. He went to Paul's colleague and learned that Paul had quit his job at the bank a year ago. On the way home, he met Kleiner's son, Kleiner Jr., and this person was the guy who had threatened Reacher. The rich boy liked the policewoman. He went to warn her to stay away from Reacher, saying Reacher was a murderer. Roscoe didn't believe it at all, not paying attention to him and driving away directly. At this time, Reacher received a phone call from Oscar. He said he had found an important clue. It turned out that a local resident had discovered a burned car, possibly a car rented by the victims. Then Reacher and Oscar arrived at the scene. The car had no license plate. Someone intentionally hid the car here. Reacher looked at the burn marks inside and confirmed that it was the work of professionals. Then he found the car's VIN. At this time, Roscoe arrived at the scene.
Told the two of them about the men he had killed, saying that he had to go back and continue processing the body. Oscar stopped him, but Reacher ignored him. Before investigating the truth, he was forced to hide the body to avoid the attention of other state police. Then Reacher brought Roscoe to the scene. She saw the bloody body and immediately asked why Kleiner Jr. said he was a murderer. Reacher explained. When he was still in the army, while on a mission near a certain tribe, he encountered a few children being abused by 3 men. Reacher immediately stopped them. After that, the 3 men came looking for him to take revenge. They quietly sneaked into his house. Reacher discovered them and, hiding in a dark corner, killed all 3 at once, which is why Kleiner Jr. said he was a murderer. After hearing Reacher's explanation, she no longer misunderstood him, and the two decided to hide the body at the airport. Reacher intentionally damaged the security camera at the airport. The night guard saw this and immediately went to check. Reacher broke the gate's arm, and Roscoe drove the body inside. After stopping the car, he wiped it to hide his fingerprints. He took the license plate and hid it in his shirt. While the security guard was fixing the camera, they sneaked out. The two went to the motel parking lot, took down their license plate, then replaced it with the stolen license plate and threw the old license plate into the grass. After finishing everything, the two of them went to the motel. Reacher conveniently took a toothpick from a tube. After entering the room, he stuffed a toothpick into the door crack, then used a chair to block the door. If an assassin entered, it could prolong the time. He also fixed the curtain with a coat hanger to block a sniper's view. After completing these tasks, he received a phone call from Molly. She had already gathered the documents. The two agreed to meet at the subway at 5 p.m. the next day. The next day, Reacher and Roscoe went to see the victim's wife, Peter Zapata's wife. When the other person heard the news, she didn't feel sad. On the contrary, she felt that her husband deserved it. Because she knew that while her husband was working at the Kleiner factory, he stole air conditioners and sold them. Otherwise, with the income of a truck driver, how could they live in a villa and help her parents pay off the mortgage? If he had messed with someone he shouldn't have, it would definitely have a tragic outcome, so the wife was mentally prepared.
Then the wife took the two into the warehouse. Inside, there was also an air conditioner box that Peter had stolen. It was poor judgment. Just relying on selling air conditioners cannot make enough money to buy a villa. It is very likely that this air conditioner box contains counterfeit money. At that moment, Oscar called. Through the VIN of the burned car, related information was found. The two immediately met their colleague Oscar. They learned the owner of the car was Harrow. Harrow used to stay at a motor lodge. After listening, Reacher realized that this was the fake name that his brother Joe often used. Furthermore, the motel did not record a checkout time, so the motel was likely keeping Joe's personal belongings. After getting the address of the motel, the two immediately went there. But they didn't expect to be one step late. The boss said that there were two Spaniards who had just taken Joe's bag and suit. They had left the motel. Reacher speculated that Joe must have known that someone was pursuing him, so he would not leave important information in his pocket. So the suit was the important thing, and those two people who got the clothes would quickly leave the scene. They would likely throw away the suit. Thinking of this, Reacher opened the trash can next to it, and sure enough, there was a suit inside. Reacher discovered that inside the suit was a piece of paper. At this time, someone attacked. The assassins couldn't find anything in the bag, so they turned back. Reacher and Roscoe split up and ran away. Reacher held the piece of paper to lure them. He ran into the alley. The car chasing after him immediately got stuck. He took the opportunity to shoot and kill one man, but his gun was out of bullets. Another person followed close behind, but was suddenly attacked by Reacher. The two dueled. Reacher knocked his opponent's gun away and then beat him to the ground. Unexpectedly, the gun fell right next to him. The opponent picked up the gun and pointed it at Reacher. At that moment, Roscoe ran to the rescue and then informed Oscar. Reacher suspected that their phone had been tapped by Stevenson, which revealed their location and let the assassins get to the motel first. Then, the three people gathered and discovered that the piece of paper containing Paul's phone number had the same handwriting as Joe's, proving that the piece of paper under the first victim's shoe was intentionally left by Joe. On the paper, in addition to Paul's phone number, there were 3 other phone numbers along with the words Garage Zapata. Reacher and Roscoe went to the garage but couldn't find any clues, so they only had the 3 phone numbers left. They split up to call them. Reacher called the number for the Department of Sanitation/Environmental in Memphis. Roscoe called the number for Professor William of Princeton University of Economics. The message was that he was attending a conference and would return in 3 days. What connection did these things have to the truth? Roscoe asked her fan friend to help her. He is a private detective. After the friend learned about the situation, he immediately agreed
to help with the investigation. At 5 p.m., they went to the subway to meet Molly. Even though Molly had never met Reacher, she immediately recognized him because he looked very similar to Joe. They stood on the escalator waiting for Molly to come up, but after waiting for a long time, they didn't see her. Reacher had a bad feeling and immediately ran down the escalator. He found Molly's suitcase lying on the ground but empty inside. He followed the line and found Molly, but she had been shot to death. Another person died, making Reacher extremely angry. He swore that he must make the perpetrator pay a heavy price. Because their car was broken, Reacher temporarily borrowed a Bentley. Then he went to the farm of the Kleiner factory and couldn't find any clues. Reacher was going crazy. He went to ask the cashier, "Is your boss the murderer?" After a while, he turned around and left. Reacher accidentally looked down and discovered weeds stuck to his shoes. Wasn't this the same weed that was on Paul's shoe? Was Paul finally alive or dead? Reacher was extremely frustrated. Reacher then went to look for Roscoe and discovered someone had written curse words on her car. Reacher thought it must have been KJ's doing. Without saying a word, he went directly to him. Unexpectedly, faced with the questioning from the 1.9-meter-tall guy, KJ not only admitted it but also mouthed off. Reacher finally let out all the pain he'd been holding in. KJ's juniors were brutally beaten by Reacher, and one held a knife to secretly stab him. At this time, Roscoe and Oscar were present, and Boss Kleiner also appeared. KJ could only put down the knife. But after they left the restaurant, revenge came for Roscoe. The chief called to find an excuse to fire her. This case, which was already difficult, was now even more difficult. The next person most likely to be fired was Oscar, so he had to act quickly. The only clue now was the note left behind by Joe. On the paper was a sentence, "Kleiner's case, Gray." Gray was Roscoe's adoptive father and also a former police chief. Gray had committed suicide. Roscoe also confirmed that his father did not leave any case files behind. At this moment, she suddenly remembered the gun Gray left for her. The gun case was very likely to hold clues. Sure enough, after a while of searching, she discovered a key. But there was no cabinet in her house that matched this key. At this moment, she suddenly remembered. Roscoe once said that her adoptive father was an extremely meticulous man. Even though there wasn't much hair left on his head, he still got it cut once a week. Reacher realized the answer probably lay in the barbershop, so they quickly went there. Sure enough, they found a suitcase here. Inside were documents related to the Kleiner factory, indirect documents proving the Kleiner enterprise printed counterfeit money. But this was only indirect evidence. To overthrow Kleiner, they needed direct evidence. At this moment, Roscoe realized that his father did not commit suicide. The next day, Roscoe went to forensics to get his father's photo. The fatal wound on the body was magnified 100 times. The image was extremely clear. Weld marks could even be seen in detail. The welds overlapped each other to resemble the shape of a diamond. After looking at it, Roscoe immediately knew who killed Mr. Gray, Chief Grover, because his walking stick had a diamond shape attached to it. Roscoe got angry and went to the police station to punch him. Oscar promptly appeared to help the out-of-control Roscoe leave. Grover ordered her arrested and brought to justice. Oscar just beat the officer and took her out of town to take refuge.
On this side, Reacher's friend also investigated some clues. Reacher went to New York to meet her. She had looked up the phone number's owner from the Environmental Protection Agency, but he was shot dead 5 years ago. After death, he was beaten, exactly the same as the first crime in town. And he was then in charge of investigating the pollution case in the New York River. The source of pollution was the Kleiner factory. Then, the Kleiner factory moved to town. Very soon, a federal police officer was shot dead. With such clear evidence, the police only convicted a burglar. Kleiner Enterprise could cover the sky with one hand. In the evening, Reacher's friend took Reacher to meet 2 policemen. Officer Eklund had once secretly investigated the death of the chief. He learned the assassin's nickname was Vikings. Besides that, there were no other clues. On the way back, something unexpected happened. Eklund's colleague pointed a gun at his head. Then he pulled the trigger, intending to destroy both the person and the car. Reacher saw that and kicked the steering wheel hard. The car lost control and crashed into the river. Reacher could have saved the policeman, but he chose to let him die to repent. It turned out that his family members were threatened by others, and the assassination attempt failed. If he returned, his family would definitely be in danger. In the end, Reacher and his friend successfully escaped death. The friend stayed behind to continue investigating the Viking, and Reacher returned to town. At the same time, Oscar broke into the Kleiner Enterprise to find evidence of printing fake money. But when he barged into the office, the scene before his eyes shocked him completely. Boss Kleiner, the man who covered the sky with one hand, was dead. The next day, Reacher looked at the victim's photo. Through the wound, it could be seen that this was the way Venezuelan mercenaries kill people. The two speculated that the perpetrator was likely Kleiner's Venezuelan client. But even though the boss was dead, the counterfeit money empire still operated. The two decided to
follow Kleiner's transport truck. Reacher switched to an old car and waited for Oscar to locate Kleiner's transport. Very quickly, they discovered Kleiner's nephew drove the truck away from the factory. The truck likely contained a large amount of counterfeit money, so the two people immediately followed. Watching from morning to night while the driver was sleeping, Reacher climbed onto the roof of the truck. He poked a hole in the roof to check and found that the inside was empty. There was nothing in the trailer, so what was the point of traveling so far? This made Reacher extremely confused. If you don't understand, then you have to change the direction of the investigation. He remembered the professor's phone number. Today was the day he returned, so Reacher immediately called him. Unexpectedly, the housekeeper, Professor William, answered the phone. She said William was shot to death a few hours ago. He didn't dare to hesitate and immediately called the remaining number, but no one picked up. He could only leave a message telling the other person that it was dangerous and to quickly run to the police station. After hanging up the phone, Reacher drove to New York. At this time, Roscoe was hiding in a house when she discovered a flashlight outside. She immediately took the gun to check. She saw 2 assassins nearby who were on the phone. She accidentally stepped on a tree branch. The assassin immediately chased after her, firing continuously. She hid behind a tree to avoid the bullets and shot one guy. Roscoe observed carefully and discovered an assassin's leg exposed. When she was about to fire, his leg retracted. Although there was no longer a target, it did not affect her aim. She shot the bark off the tree, and the wood dust immediately fell into the assassin's eyes. His grenade fell to the ground, killing him on the spot. Her hideout was no longer safe. She took Paul's wife and children along the main road to a nearby town. At the same time, she notified Picard to assist. While waiting, Paul's wife told the truth. A year ago, after Paul was fired from the bank, Kleiner immediately found her husband and spent a large amount of money to hire him to convert the cash flow into legal funds. This was as easy as eating candy for Paul. Very quickly, he was completely converted. Kleiner then asked Paul to send him the transfer history. Paul didn't think too much and immediately sent it, unexpectedly falling into Kleiner's trap. Kleiner then took him to the stable and said that each of the bills converted earlier was linked to international counterfeiting. Only then did Paul realize that he had fallen into the tiger's mouth. To ensure Paul obediently obeyed, Kleiner locked him in a horse cage. Then he had his subordinates nail a living person to the wall in front of him. Not only warning him, but also threatening his family's life, Paul had no other choice but to join. After the wife finished talking, Picard arrived at the restaurant to pick them up. On Reacher's side, he went to New York, put on a suit, went to the police station, and used his identity as a lawyer to meet the professor, Fanny. It turns out that after she received the phone call from Reacher, she immediately fled to the police station. Thanks to this, she saved her life. From Fanny, he learned that people were making super realistic counterfeit money. This type of counterfeit money could not be recognized as fake. Joe discovered that the key was in the paper used to make the counterfeit money, and at the same time, he pinpointed the source of the imported paper, which was why he was killed. So, as long as they could find the source of their paper, they could destroy the empire that printed fake money. After leaving the police station, he discovered an assassin following him, so he lured him into an alley. The two men faced each other, punching each other extremely fiercely, but the killer was no less skilled. The two fought from the ground up to the stairs. The situation immediately turned. The assassin was beaten and had all the bones in his body broken. He died instantly. The officer was immersed in the joy of knowing his wife was pregnant at night, not paying attention to a pickup truck in the woods outside. 4 men wearing protective suits stepped down, slowly moving towards the officer's garage. His end was tragic and miserable. Changing to another scene, as soon as Reacher got off the plane, he was immediately taken to the officer's garage by the police. The officer and his wife were tied to chairs facing each other, surrounded by mirrors.
The officer's eyes were taped open and could not be closed. Seeing this, Reacher immediately speculated that the murderer must have wanted information from the officer. So he was made a viewer. The mirrors around meant he could see his wife being abused to death. Oscar guessed that the killers knew they were about to find out the truth, so they were killing everyone involved. Then Chief Grover called the two people out of the room, using the excuse of not having investigative authority to fire Oscar. After Grover left, he looked at Officer Baker and said he'd like to invite the last honest policeman in town for a meal. After that, the two went to the restaurant to discuss the details of the case. Reacher says every death seems to have someone behind it on a list. Oscar was still being chased, but now only Baker was safe. Reacher intentionally told Baker that he would go to the officer's garage to look for evidence tonight. Then the two went to a car repair shop. Reacher noticed staff using clay to clean oil stains. After fixing the car, he went to the supermarket to buy fencing,
electric batons, and a shovel. He arrived at the officer's garage earlier than planned. He turned on the TV to the loudest level, went to the bathroom, painted his face, and put on a hat. He hid in the grass. Tonight was the time to hunt. Very quickly, a pickup truck stopped in front of the officer's garage. 4 assassins got out of the car and rushed into the house. Reacher quickly killed the driver, then turned on the car's headlights to attract the attention of the killers in the house. An assassin went out to check. When he opened the door, the driver's body immediately caught his eye. Before he could react, his neck was broken. Reacher entered the house from the back door and quietly took down another guy. Very quickly, another guy followed the footprints on the ground. The footprints led to a room. He opened it and found only a pair of shoes. Reacher appeared suddenly and stabbed him. This scene was seen at the right moment by the last flanker, who immediately opened fire. Reacher hid behind cover. When the assassin ran out of bullets, Reacher picked up a metal bar and attacked. The two fought hard, fighting from the inside out. Reacher's gun was knocked away. The assassin also took the iron bar and hit him with it. Reacher fell into the swimming pool. The assassin jumped down after him. At the right moment of danger, Reacher found a gun and shot him 3 times. The 4 perpetrators of the consecutive murder cases were finished. After that, he put all their weapons in the trunk of his car. When he washed himself clean, he saw the words on the paper had faded. He had discovered the secret of the counterfeit money empire and immediately called Roscoe. It turns out that American paper money has different values but the same size. So you just need to bleach a $1 bill to remove the printing but keep the specialized security marks. Then you print the image of a $100 bill on it. So the $1 bill has turned into a bill worth 100 times more. Paul was mainly responsible for finding and purchasing large quantities of $1 bills from organizations that hid their income from the government. For example, casinos, money exchanges, or national chain stores. Then the $1 bills would be taken to the factory to be completely bleached. The wastewater would pour into the river. This was also the reason why the environmental department investigator was murdered. Next, they used animal feed to treat the industrial wastewater. They used clay to process lubricants, because clay contains polyampolamide, and animal feed also contains this ingredient. The enterprise bought several hundred dairy cows and then imported a large amount of animal feed. This would bypass the government. Next, they used a washing machine to make the fake money look older. A truck driver transported the counterfeit money to customers. When the enterprise had money, they immediately used it to bribe people. To overthrow them, they needed the fake money as direct evidence. After calling Roscoe, Reacher informed Oscar. But Oscar was in danger now. 3 assassins had come to the motel where he was staying. After Reacher learned about the situation, he gave Oscar instructions on how to run away. Turn the TV volume up as loud as possible. Oscar was staying at a cheap motel, so the walls would definitely use cheap drywall. Reacher told him to use a folding knife to break through the wall and then go straight to the next room. Oscar quickly ran out of the motel and into his car. Before running away, he also shot the tires of the enemy car. Then he left safely. The next day, the two met at Peter Zapata's house. Reacher had a feeling that his garage must have a problem, but he was still 1 step slow. The factory people had burned this place down, and nothing remained. Luckily, Peter's wife had left here before. At this time, Reacher discovered that the wife did not take her husband's last name. So the words Garage Zapata on the paper must refer to someone else, most likely Peter's parents. The two quickly went to his parents' house. Sure enough, a large amount of fake money was found in their garage. With this important evidence, Reacher immediately told Oscar to call Picard and take Roscoe to the appointed location. Oscar drove first and Reacher followed with the evidence. At this time, he received a phone call from his friend. She had the results of the investigation. The murderer of the environmental department investigator was named Neat, a cop who lived in a mansion and drove a luxury car. He died first of cancer, but he had a partner named Picard. As soon as Reacher entered the room, he was restrained. At this time, all the people behind the conspiracy were in one room. It turns out that the insider was Picard. Grover then confiscated Reacher's gun. Kleiner's son captured Roscoe, Oscar, and Paul's wife. At the same time, he told Reacher the whole truth. He had imitated the killing method of Venezuelan mercenaries to kill his father. He also hired Picard's associates to kill the Environmental Protection Agency investigator and Peter Zapata. At the same time, Molly and Joe's deaths were also related to Kleiner Jr. The culprit behind everything was Kleiner Jr., and the pervert who beat the dead man was his cousin. The person who covered the first victim with cardboard was the previous director, whom Kleiner Jr. then killed. But Kleiner Jr. didn't kill Reacher yet. It turns out that Paul held all the criminal evidence of the counterfeit money empire, and had slipped away. Kleiner Jr. had investigated Reacher and learned that he was very good at tracking, so he threatened Jack to find Paul before 6 a.m. the next morning. Otherwise, it would be difficult for Roscoe and Paul's wife. To escape death, Jack and Picard then went to the diner. They ordered coffee and apple pie. Next, they took out the map and started looking for the person. How should I find him? Jack drew a circle on the map. He got the answer immediately. He's at O'Coaster. Why? Jack explained that to protect his wife and children, Paul was forced to flee far away. But just in case, he wouldn't hide too far. The distance wouldn't be too great. The place is close to town, but has something to do with Paul. It is O'Coaster, because that's where the golf set under my garage came from. When the employee brought the food, Jack intentionally spilled his cup of coffee to take the opportunity to take the spoon. After going out, he crashed into the wheel. Very quickly, the tire pressure warning system indicated the pressure was too low. Jack got out of the car to change the tire. Picard was afraid something bad would happen, so he got out of the car to follow. He just fell into Jack's scheme. To get the tire, you have to open the trunk. The trunk of the car had weapons he stole from the assassins. The two of them have never stopped. Picard said, "You can't kill me," because it was only my voice that Kaji let go. Otherwise, Roscoe will lose his life. Jack also responded that he couldn't kill him either, because without me, you can't find Paul. If you don't complete your mission, you will be killed. Finally, the two agreed. Jack proposed they raise their guns to their heads and put them down on the count of 2. Then count to 3 and go out. Jack then started the countdown, which he didn't follow. When he counted to 3, he immediately opened fire and killed Picard. He sent the spy down to meet the King of Hell. Jack then drove to the motel near Augusta. He successfully found Paul. Because in order to avoid pursuit, he would not dare to use his credit card. So if he had cash, the only way was to take a bus. Cash was limited, so if he wanted to stay long-term, he had to stay in a cheap motel. On the way back, through Paul, he learned that to save himself, he denounced her. Do. At the same time, Peter was discovered stealing fake money, so he became the contact person for Do. Unexpectedly, he was discovered by Kaji and then killed by him. On this side, Oscar was beaten bloody by Baker. After beating him, he locked him up. At this time, Oscar's phone received a text message. Baker checked and found that the content was to find cover to escape. Just when he didn't understand what it meant, a car drove into the police station. It hit and killed Baker. Then he jumped into the car to rescue Oscar. They equipped themselves with weapons and prepared to rescue Roscoe and Paul's wife. Rag picked up the water bottle from the ground. Franz was also here at this time. Paul relied on his memory to draw a map of the Kleiner factory. They quickly appeared outside the factory. Rag poured gasoline into the water tank. Franz set up a sniper rifle to kill the guards. Then they dumped gasoline around the factory. Oscar threw the burning cigarette into the fire. The factory immediately caught fire. 4 people stormed into the factory. Franz stood covering them from a high position. Wherever you see an enemy, hit him. And Paul took the opportunity to save his 2 children. Very quickly, under Oscar's protection, he saved Roscoe. Roscoe took Paul's wife out to reunite with him. Then they returned to fight. On this side, Oscar encountered Picard. He was still alive. Picard climbed up and pushed Oscar to the ground. He was no match for Picard, but he aimed at the right moment to grab his wound and counterattacked successfully. He made him fall onto the press machine and pressed the button. Picard immediately turned into a pulp. Roscoe was secretly attacked by Rob. He approached her, but she quickly knocked him down. The two of them wrestled on the ground. After a while of struggling, Rob was handcuffed to a wheelchair by Roscoe, and a shot sent him off to meet the King of Hell. At this time, the fire in the factory was too big. Roscoe and the 2 others gathered. They ran out of the factory, and Jack was confronting Kaji. Jack's gun quickly ran out of bullets. He was just looking for an opportunity to sneak attack. Fighting with his bare hands gave him a taste of pain. Kaji is of course not his opponent. Jack picked up the spear and swung it back and forth, but Jack avoided it. Then he put his head under the bleaching water. Next, he kicked him into the fire and sent him down to the underworld. The match was over. Francis texted to announce his departure first. Jack looked at the battle medal. He remembered his mother's dying relics. When she passed away, it was also the time he and his brother met each other. Jack couldn't hold back the pain. In the end, Jack hid his medal at the place where his brother was murdered. Goodbye, partner, Roscoe. Then he left this town to continue his adventurous journey. And those are also the final details of the movie Reacher. How do you feel about this movie? Please leave your comments below to let us know. Thanks for watching, and see you guys in the next videos.